Okay, so cell transport. Here are the objectives. We'll get through all of these objectives in this lecture. Okay, we can start with phospholipids. A lot of the stuff we're going to talk about today, you guys have already learned. So phospholipids, we talked about in the macromolecule unit, have a polar head and they have two nonpolar tails. The head's polar. What other molecule did we talk about that was polar? Water. Water is polar. So the head will be attracted to water, and the tails will not be attracted to water. Since the head is attracted to water, we say that the head is hydrophilic. And we say the tails are hydrophobic. Even though they're not really afraid of water, they just are not attracted to it. So we call that hydrophobic. So the heads are always going to be attracted to water, and the tails are always going to be not attracted to water. A cell membrane. We talked about this in the cell unit. Cell membranes are phospholipid bilayers. So 2 layers of phospholipids. And the layers are created when the heads face the water environments. So there's water inside the cell, which is the intracellular portion, and there's water outside the cell, which we call the extracellular portion. So water inside the cell and water outside the cell. So this is where the water is, inside the cell and outside the cell. This whole area right here is hydrophobic. So there's no water in there. Okay. The heads all stay together because they're polar, they're attracted to each other. And the tails are just forced to be together. It's not like they want to be together, but they're just forced to be together. So that's what the cell membrane looks like. But the cell membrane isn't just phospholipids. There's also other stuff in there. So some of the other stuff that's in the cell membrane are things like cholesterol. So here's some cholesterol. Cholesterol is a lipid, and it maintains the fluidity of the cell. Maintains the fluidity of the cell. That means that if the cell gets really cold, it won't break apart because the cholesterol is in there to keep it fluid. And also if it heats up, the cell won't just fall apart. All right, and then there's these other things called transmembrane proteins. The transmembrane proteins do exactly how they sound. They go through the cell membrane. Since they do go through it, there's going to be hydrophilic areas of the transmembrane proteins. So the inside and outside of the cell are going to have hydrophilic regions. And then there's going to be these hydrophobic regions. And those hydrophobic regions are quite often made of alpha helices. Remember we talked about that when we talked about proteins? So there's going to be alpha helices that make up the hydrophobic region. And that hydrophobic region of the transmembrane protein allows it to stay where the tails are. Okay, so let's talk about some of these different transmembrane proteins. This first one is a receptor protein. And receptor proteins have an area that receives a signal. That signal could be a hormone. And that hormone can bind to that area of the protein like an active site and give a signal to the cell. So this is a way that, say, protein hormones can signal the cell that they want it to do something. So the receptor proteins receive a signal in the form of a chemical or a hormone that allows the cell to do something. Another kind of transmembrane protein are these channel proteins. And channel proteins have a pathway through them that allows material to flow into and out of the cell. Channel proteins are always open. So anything small enough to fit through the channel can go into or out of the cell. We also have gated channel proteins. And gated channel proteins have these gates around them, or a gate on them, one side or the other, or both. And the gated channel proteins will allow material to pass through, but only when the cell wants it to. So when the cell's ready to receive the material or to get rid of the material, it'll open the gate and then allow the material to leave freely. Yeah. Another kind of transmembrane protein are these transport proteins. Transport proteins only move specific materials. Transport proteins only move specific materials. Okay. Because of that, they have another area. It's kind of like an active site, and that active site will only fit a certain kind of molecule. It's like the active site for enzymes. Okay, and the last kind that we're going to talk about, at least, are glycoproteins. And glycoproteins have these carbohydrate chains attached to them. That's why the glyco, that's the sugar part of it, glyco. Remember glycogen was a sugar? So glycoproteins have carbohydrate chains, and they act as like a cell identification. It's like a flag on the outside of the cell, so the body knows that cell should be there. Okay, so the glycoproteins have that carbohydrate chain that acts as like a flag, so the body knows that that cell should be there. Sometimes when people get organ transplants, if they have the wrong glycoproteins, the organ could be rejected by the patient's immune system because the body doesn't recognize that flag or that glycogen strand.